Hi everyone, my name is Joanna Duarte. I'm a researcher at the University of Amsterdam, and I'll be presenting today with my colleague.
Natalie Shaw. I'm a lecturer and researcher at Untitled University, specifically in the ITEPS program, and that stands for International Teacher Education for Primary Schools. We're at the campus in Meppel, this multi-campus university. You'll find us in the north of the Netherlands.
We'll be presenting today on our GlobalEquitEd project on critical global citizenship for educational equity. We'll be specifically focusing on the role of linguistic and cultural diversity in transitioning from primary to secondary education.
While we're going through, we'd like to pose a question that's really been underpinning our entire project. What is your own linguistic and cultural background? So how would you define yourself? And of course, that is an intersectionality issue between many, many different aspects of your personality and your identity. But how do you identify? And what impact do you think it has had on your educational journey as you went from the entrance of primary education all the way through to higher education?
And our project has been framed, of course, by the fourth Sustainable Development Goal on quality education, and specifically on ensuring inclusive and equitable education for all. And we do know that this is a challenge, and the director of the OECD has also mentioned that the dream that we have of quality education for all is still far off. So what can we do to address educational inequity? And we have decided, after our literature review, to focus specifically on transition processes. So inequities in education often become very evident in transition processes in education that lead to either different school forms or different academic tracks within a school. It takes, of course, many different forms across the globe. So students can go to different school forms. They can attend school for a different amount of years, so from 8, 10, 12, or they cannot even maybe access some forms of education in different settings. So what is the role of shaping, or how can we shape inclusive education when we are looking at transition processes specifically? And in the literature, it has been suggested that this is a complex task. You should combine different approaches in order to shape inclusive learning environments. We've decided to combine literature on a culturally and linguistic responsive teaching with literature and knowledge from critical global citizenship education, as we feel that it can help us address two issues. On the one hand, to reflect upon and expose underlying and intertwined forms of inequities, for example, has manifested in asymmetries in power distribution, in participation, and also specifically focus on emancipatory models, as Vanessa Andriotti calls them. And simultaneously, we wish to reinforce multilingual and multicultural identities of linguistically and culturally diverse pupils. In a nutshell, our GlobalEquitEd project focuses on critical global citizenship education in relation to equity in transition processes in education. And because this is still quite broad, we focus on forms of assessment, specifically also summative assessment, that might lead to tracking, to early academic tracking. So our aim is to reflect upon and expose underlying and intertwined forms of inequities, asymmetries in power distribution and participation, while reinforcing identities of linguistically and culturally diverse pre-service teachers and their pupils.
So how did we do that? The aim of our project was the design of a toolkit, so really a practical outcome to help teachers engage with these issues, because they are complex and they are quite broad. So our intention was to create something that really targets these teachers in practice and helps to identify the issues and to create a more equitable practice out of reflection as well. So this is the GlobalEquitEd toolkit, and we had two phases of the project. In phase one, we engaged threefold. So we had three elements of study. We first of all did a survey with pre-service teachers, and we surveyed teachers both in the international track in which I work and the Dutch teacher education, in which Joanna mainly works, about their experiences in transition processes, also summative assessment in education and their reflections upon that. We also did interviews with children and teachers in primary schools, so really people in the practice themselves, children who are currently going through this experience, but also teachers working with them. And we did a small meta-study on the student teachers who were the interviewers of study 2. So we were quite curious also about how does engaging with this subject matter impact on the students and them telling their educational journey and recollecting ideas from their own educational trajectory as well. All this knowledge we then used in the second phase. But before we show you the second phase, here is a quote that quite nicely sums up from the first part of the study how student teachers shared with us how they felt. In my opinion, giving students this type of school advice, as given in early tracking, sort of puts a label on a young child, like someone just decided if you are smart or not for the rest of your life. So really the idea of this is not one assessment of many, this is a pronouncement of who you are. And this is almost a verdict of your entire person, your entire identity as a learner from this point forward. So a very, very heavy impact that we found here in that study. Between phase 1 and 2, our aim really was to take everything that we had gotten out of the 3 studies that formed phase 1 and to transfer it into this practical toolkit that we are going to present in our session in further depth. It has 9 different elements that users can engage with that are designed also on knowledge and the resources that we gathered. It is still under construction, so we have to say there's parts that work very well already and there's parts that are still being developed, but overall you can get a good impression when you come to our session to see what it would be like. As a little teaser from the toolkit, here's something that teachers are invited to engage with, or any learners. It could also be pre-service teachers or anyone else interested, which has to do with, as you can see on the right, ideologies and mindsets in assessment of multilingual pupils. There you're going to find writing samples by children. They are fantastically genuine. They are occasionally really, really funny as well, because children write about their own life experience. And it shows the responses of teachers. So it also shows how this has been assessed and what feedback children have been given. And in that, what we wanted to bring out is really the difference between looking at something from a deficit point of view versus a resource-oriented point of view, and how that feedback and how the perception of mistakes that children make would differ, and also an engagement with these different texts that children are being asked to write and the identity that comes out through these texts when children report on birthday parties and outings and family occasions and all the rest of it as well. Our intention here was twofold, and you can see the margin sort of in the middle converging. On the one hand, on the left, we wanted empathy, so the idea of recollecting maybe own text you had to write, a reflection on this is something that teachers ask children to write as well, but what's also the reaction to the writing, so a very personal element. On the other side, on the right, the conceptual understanding of the difference between deficit and resource orientation, and converging, hopefully, out of those engagements would be the idea of a more equitable practice that arises from the reflections and the engagement with the material as well.
Yes. So what have we learned so far? In sum, we investigated through our survey and interviews the perceived cognitive and socio-affective effects of early academic tracking in our own students. And we did, of course, find many positive effects of early academic tracking in transition moments, because our students are obviously successfully attending higher education right now. But we were a little bit alarmed by the wide range negative effects that we found and that were listed, in particular in a retrospective perspective. So at the time of transition and the years that followed in secondary education. And these were mostly negative socio-affective effects. Students mentioned anxiety, stress, insecurity, low self-concept, also a low self-academic concept. So we will be exploring those in our session. With all this knowledge, we have developed the GlobalEquitEd toolkit to support teachers and pre-service teachers in primary education across the globe, including critical global citizenship and culturally and linguistically responsive teaching in their assessment, leading towards educational transitions. We'll be presenting all of this in our session on the 22nd of March, starting at 11:15, and we will be in the session B, the second session, session B, in the last time slot. So come to our session. These are our references for this presentation, and we will be thanking you in our languages. So, muito obrigada.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.